We're coming on the air with really big time talks, lots of talks, 8 hours worth of talking between the U.S. and Russia. But as for the action, well, not looking like much, at least right now, which is not all that surprising. And here's what else is not surprising. Russia says they're not planning to invade Ukraine anytime soon. So should we believe them? Coming up, part of my conversation with a top State Department official. Plus, our chief foreign affairs correspondent is here live on these high drama, high stakes diplomatic discussions. A lot at stake. Back home, the COVID standoff between Chicago's mayors and teachers is on day 4, with one side calling the other now, quote, relentlessly stupid. Yikes. We're going to take you live on the ground with that in-school or no-school battle, plus the new details just coming in over rules for insurance to cover at-home COVID tests. Could save you some money. Plus, college is already ridiculously expensive, and jumping through those financial aid hoops can be tricky to navigate. Now, some former students are accusing top universities of working together to make it even harder. We've got to look at that new lawsuit in just a bit. And look, sometimes journalism's all about experimenting. Our Vicky Nguyen did one herself on those Apple AirTags that can track everything, even you. She's got our backstory tonight on what you need to know about these little gadgets. Plus, the closest of calls out in L.A. Check it out, this almost unbelievable video of cops saving a pilot after his plane landed in front of an oncoming train. Yeah, you heard that right. His plane landed on the tracks right in front of a train. What do you hear what the officers in this heroic rescue have to say? Hey, I'm Hallie. And if you're starting to get a tickle of some Cold War vibes, that may not be a stretch, maybe, given that the U.S. and Russia have been involved in these talks basically all day today over the standoff at the Ukraine border. So let's get into what both sides want here and what they can't seem to get. Check out this map, first of all. Look at these red circles you're about to see. See them? That's where Russia is building up troops. The U.S. basically wants those red circles to go away. It's not super clear just how many troops are there, but it could be more than 100,000. On the flip side, Vladimir Putin's main thing is he doesn't want Ukraine in NATO. The U.S. says that is a non-starter. Russia also wants NATO to roll back troops, planes, and warships. Now, as of this moment, Russia is saying, hey, there's no reason to fear any escalation imminently. They say we're not planning to invade right now. That's from the Russian deputy foreign minister. That's the guy you see right here. So our own Lester Holt asked President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, if he thinks the Kremlin is telling the truth. Watch.
Russia's opening message today was essentially, we have no interest in invading Ukraine. Do you believe them?
We believe that the Russians have positioned tens of thousands of troops and advanced military equipment on the border with Ukraine, and that they have done so with at least the capability, if not the intention, to invade. We believe the threat of invasion is real, and we are determined through a combination of deterrence and diplomacy to avert that circumstance, to defend Ukrainian territorial integrity and sovereignty, and to convince the Russians that the right course to go down is a course of diplomacy rather than a course of conflict.
More of that interview with Lester coming up on Nightly, but I want to bring in our own Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, we're so glad to have you after such a big and important day on the diplomatic front. And listen, Russia didn't walk away, right? Russia didn't immediately go out and escalate. Does that meet the sort of admittedly low bar for quote unquote success that both sides had going into this?
I don't think anyone would call it success. But basically the low bar, Hallie, was just to sit down, talk, lay out their opposing positions, and not negotiate. So this, as Wendy Sherman told us in a briefing afterwards, and she's the Deputy Secretary of State, the top U.S. negotiator on all of this, is to lay out what their concerns are, to hear what the Russians are worried about, which is basically the possibility that Ukraine might join NATO, and that there is a NATO forward deployment of troops on its eastern flank, close to the Russian border, as well as any possible missile deployment, and U.S. concerns about that 100,000 troop deployment along the border, which it sees as an imminent threat to Ukraine because they could move over on a moment's notice, and also Russian pressure on Ukraine, other things that Russia has done to pressure and to interfere, the misinformation, trying to rile up protests in Ukraine. Potentially, they do want to get into the possibility of something that Russia has done before in 2014, right. 2015, and 16, which is cyber attacks, taking down Ukraine's whole infrastructure. But right now, it's just to lay out each side's concerns.
So Ukraine is sort of preemptively, Andrea, preparing for the possibility of that, right? I want to show some video to folks that our Richard Engel, our colleague who's overseas, he's in Ukraine there, got, literally in the trenches, right? Ukraine, listen, not part of any of these talks bilaterally. There will be multilateral talks the rest of this week involving Russia. And we know that Russia, Andrea, is not afraid to send in troops, right? We're seeing that right this very second in Kazakhstan, where more than 160 people have died during protests. Putin says, oh, they have so-called victory there today. But if we take Russian officials at face value, which is a huge if, right, that they're not planning on invading, is this Putin pretending to try to play nice on the world stage? Is this a pretext for them to say, hey, diplomacy didn't work. We did these talks and nobody could figure something out, so we're going to go in and get some cover anyway? I know there's some real concern from some of the experts that I've talked to that this could potentially just be somewhat of a cover for Putin in the worst case scenario.
Oh, sure. And that's the concern that Ukraine has also, that we'll stretch out these talks and, boom, they'll find some provocation that they will claim. They've got plenty of Russian loyalists inside Ukraine and certainly in Crimea, which they now control, which they took in 2014 and which they didn't pull back through any of the threats of sanctions and real sanctions. So that's why the U.S. and its allies claim they have a united front and that they're going to take really extraordinary steps, unprecedented sanctions to pressure Russia. And Russia has some vulnerabilities within their economy. If Russia does step across that border, what hasn't been defined, frankly, Hallie, is what constitutes an incursion or an invasion. And what will they do if Russia just sits on that border, which, according to Wendy Sherman today in her briefing with us, we want Russia to put those troops back in their barracks, but they're stationed on Russian territory. So how and why should we control that? The other thing about this is that nobody is saying that Ukraine is ready to join NATO. In fact, the president himself said back in June when he was in Brussels that Ukraine is not ready yet. They haven't proved that they have even met the NATO standard for admission in getting rid of their own corruption and other problems in their own government. So this is really a trumped-up crisis. The U.S. argues by Russia to try to say that, we have changed the terms of engagement, Ukraine has changed the terms, and we are more threatening, when in the NATO enlargement towards Russia on its eastern flank has been going on since the end of the Cold War.
Andrea, our loyal viewers will know that you're intrepid force at the State Department, talking with spokesperson Ned Price. I had a chance to speak with him today as well, earlier, just a little bit ago this afternoon, on if Russia invades. Is everybody in agreement about what that actually looks like? I want to play you a little bit of that and then quickly get a quick question to you about that. Watch. Are you confident that there is complete agreement among our allies about what exactly further escalation or further aggression by Russia against Ukraine would mean?
Yes, we're confident. We have heard that clearly and resolutely over the past 2 months. We are united as an alliance. We are united as a transatlantic community. And that's how we're going to operate in the coming days ahead.
So, Andrea, where do these parties go from here, right? Where do these allies go from here? And give me the, Reader's Digest version, if you will, because I could listen to you for the next 45 minutes.
No, sadly, nobody wants to do that.
I do.
No, so Wendy Sherman goes to Brussels and she briefs the allies, the European Union, she briefs NATO, and basically tries to hold them all together, tells them what she's heard, and comes up with a unified position, which they say they already have. The big problem is Germany, for instance, new government there. Are they going to be as tough as Angela Merkel was? Inflation, higher fuel prices. How much does Russia really have leverage, since they are the source of so much of this energy that flows, already goes to Germany? We would squeeze on that by cutting off the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from opening up this year. There's a lot in play here.
Yeah.
But Germany is really the unknown quantity. They say they're with us. How much are they with us?
Andrea Mitchell, our chief foreign affairs correspondent. Nobody knows this better than you, Andrea. Thank you so much for being on with us to open up our show. I appreciate it.
Great to talk to you.
A lot of people, I'm guessing a lot of you watching, at least some of you, may have shelled out, let's say, $20, $40, $100 on at-home COVID tests in the last few weeks. Those rapid tests you do in your kitchen? Well, here's some good news. In just the last hour, the Biden administration has said insurance companies have to start reimbursing you. That starts on Saturday. You'll either be able to pay for them up front with insurance or else submit them and then get the reimbursement. Listen, that's if you can find the test, right? Because right before all this news, we got a new warning from the CDC that says don't go to Canada. The agency says that because of what it's like there, even fully vaccinated travelers might be at risk for getting and spreading COVID variants. As you know, we're struggling with this whole Omicron surge here in the U.S., and that is putting a huge strain on hospitals, on people at work, on schools. New numbers showed 10 million new infections just in the last month, not even since December 13th. Half those cases were recorded this year, and many of them are from children. We've got some brand new numbers just in showing a 78% increase in pediatric COVID cases, and more of those kids are being hospitalized across the country, more than 134% over the past couple weeks. You've got children's hospitals in Illinois reporting the highest COVID numbers of the pandemic so far. And those numbers may be playing into why Chicago public schools were empty again for a fourth straight day. You've got the teachers union there fighting for remote learning, but the mayor's saying that's not going to work. Megan Fitzgerald is covering this story tonight from Chicago. Megan, let me just start with this. This is really emotional for people. Parents are emotional and upset. You have one side calling the other relentlessly stupid here. Like, this is personal and this is very real to a lot of people. And yet here we are on day 4 of this, and nothing has changed in the country's 3rd biggest school district.
Yeah, Hallie, there's a lot of frustration and a lot of confusion by parents as to why are we here? Why is the nation's 3rd largest school district not found a solution to this? The mayor will say there is a solution and that they invested some $100 million over the last 2 years to try and make sure that schools were safe. But you see the teachers union pushing back and saying that they don't believe schools are safe, specifically now as we see this surge in Omicron here in Chicago and across the country. And so what they're calling for are stronger masks, like KN95 masks for anybody who wants one. They want more testing. They want to see a metric system in place where they can track the amount of virus that's in a school at any given time, so then they can trigger online classes. They also want to do this opt-out measure, which basically means that students would be tested unless their parents opt out. It's something that the mayor says absolutely not. So there's a lot of frustration. The teachers union saying that the mayor is not working with them, that they've hit a brick wall. Frustration all around. Take a listen to what the president of the union had to say just a bit ago.
We feel like we're at a point where we don't have enough at the table to be able to go back to the people who frankly sacrificed a lot at this point and confidently say, this is something that can help us ensure safety. And so we're basically, the mayor's being relentless, but she's being relentlessly stupid. She's being relentlessly stubborn.
Yeah, resorting to name calling there, Hallie, as you could see. But, the mayor, for her credit, she has come to the table in some of the things that the union is asking for. She says, look, anybody who wants a KN95 mask can get one. A teacher, a staff member, a student, those are going to be available. She also says that she agrees that there needs to be more testing. But the biggest sticking point here is this January 18th day. This is when teachers say they are willing to go back into the classroom because they suspect that there will be a dip in the surge here in the city. But the mayor says that is a non-starter. She is calling for students and teachers to be back in the classroom now. And it's something she says she's not willing to budge on, Hallie.
And listen, we've been talking about Chicago a lot because, Megan, as I think I've said to you, like at least once a week for the past couple weeks or so, is Chicago is a microcosm of what's happening elsewhere. But there are other really big school districts in the U.S. that are trying to deal with this in a very different way. Look at this. Public school students in L.A. go back Tuesday. They've got to upload a negative COVID test online before they show up. In Philly, students started in-person learning last week. 90 schools are moving to remote learning because of Omicron. And then in New York, the nation's biggest school district, schools are operating in person. They have more testing. Clearly, Megan, there are ways to find solutions here. We just talked about 3 examples of districts that are doing that in really big cities.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is part of the frustration that we're hearing from parents who say, why are we here? The 3rd largest school district in the country. And then, as you mentioned, there's other models of how this is working in other places. And so it's really frustrating to parents because a lot of times they're finding out at the last minute that classes are canceled the next day because these negotiations are going well into the night, around 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And then it's up to the principals to then communicate with the parents that classes are canceled. So at this point, they are just hoping that there is a solution soon because, again, classes are canceled. This is not online learning. This is no learning at all.
This is nothing.
Hallie.
Yeah, Megan Fitzgerald live for us there in Chicago. Megan, thank you. So as we talk about schooling, let's talk about what's happening in the realm of higher education. And this is fascinating, right? 16 of the country's biggest and most prestigious schools Universities, I know you know, are being hit with a big lawsuit over how they work together to figure out financial aid for students. Take a look at some of the schools mentioned: Yale, Brown, Penn, Columbia, Cornell, Dartmouth, Georgetown, Notre Dame. The list goes on. You need an SAT score of like 7,000 to get into any of these schools, right? But now you've got 5 former students bringing this suit who say that these universities are giving priority to kids of wealthy donors. And they're considering whether potential students have the ability to pay to basically collude and try and limit student financial aid. So what does tuition cost at a school like Yale? You're living on campus, almost $78,000. At MIT, it's $77,000. At Penn, it's $83,000. And their endowments at the end of the 2021 fiscal year in the billions. Yale, $42 billion. MIT, $27 billion. Penn, $20.5 billion, which is to say these schools have a ton of money. I want to bring in Ken Delaney. And Ken, walk us through this suit, right? Because I think this is interesting to people who followed or were interested in the Varsity Blues scandal, et cetera. Like, what do schools and universities do? And now it's like this lawsuit's accusing, hey, if you have the money, you're more likely to be able to get in, right?
Yeah. Well, look, as someone who's a few years away from college bills, those tuition figures make my eyes water, Hallie. And by the time Monroe Jackson,
I don't even talk about it. I don't even want to talk about our 529 man.
Doubled, right? So start that college fund now. But look, this lawsuit takes aim at a group of elite universities that, full disclosure, includes my alma mater and yours, Hallie. This group was given an antitrust exemption many years ago, one that allows them to coordinate on financial aid policies. The idea was to craft a set of common standards for determining a family's ability to pay for college. And as a condition of being in this group, all the colleges pledged to be need blind, meaning they would admit students with no regard for their ability to pay. But what this lawsuit alleges is that some of these institutions are not need blind because they give preference to the children of mega donors. And because of that, the lawsuit says, this group amounts to a price-fixing cartel that prevents students from using competition to shop around to get a better financial aid deal. The suit says that this alleged price fixing has cost the plaintiffs a lot of money, and it seeks financial damages. And it's interesting to note, Hallie, that the lead lawyer in this case was the lead prosecutor in the Varsity Blues scandal you mentioned.
What are the universities saying?
By and large, they have not commented on this lawsuit, but in the past, they've defended this financial aid group as a good thing because they say it makes more aid available to minorities and to low-income students, and it does that, they say, by trying to eliminate colleges competing for students by offering financial aid that the students may not need. And it's worth mentioning that 2 studies of this group have not really found any benefits to lower-income students, but they haven't found any harm either. The studies have found that the financial aid numbers tend to work out about the same for students in this group and colleges that aren't in this group, Hallie.
Ken Delaney, I know you'll stay on top of that one for us. Thank you, friend. Appreciate it. Yet another potential witness in the January 6th investigation is sending some strong signals he is not going to cooperate. We're talking about Republican Congressman Jim Jordan, who sent a, I don't know, scathing, you want to call it rather scathing letter, 4 pages to committee chairman Benny Thompson, saying the committee's request for information is unprecedented and inappropriate, saying he has no relevant information that would help the select committee in advancing any legitimate legislative purpose. You'll remember the committee wanted to talk to Jim Jordan because they say he had at least one and possibly multiple communications with then-President Trump on January 6th. Jordan is the second member of Congress that the committee has asked for information. The first was GOP Congressman Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, who denied the request. Joining me now is Garrett Haake from Capitol Hill. Garrett, what's interesting is nowhere in Jordan's letter does it explicitly say, you know, go to hell, I'm not going to cooperate. Do you know what I mean? Right. So how do you read this?
Which is what Perry's tweets on the matter did say. So Jordan is walking not as far in his rather scathing letter, I agree with your characterization there, in the direction of saying no. Look, I think Jordan is trying to keep the door open here, trying to see what comes next, and frankly, perhaps even trying to dare the committee to see how far they're willing to go. The big decision that this committee is going to have to make here in the not-too-distant future is, do they want to subpoena members of Congress? Do they want to go down that road? Jordan talks in his letter about the speech and debate clause, the idea that what members of Congress discuss when they're putting together legislation, when they're doing their jobs as members of Congress, is supposed to be protected. He is essentially daring them to pick a constitutional fight with him. So the committee has 2 choices. They can take the dare, they can subpoena him, they can try to have that fight and risk this whole thing being tied up in court for months and months, perhaps beyond the tenure of the existence of this committee, or they can not take the dare and not get Jordan's testimony either. Bad options for the committee. Either way they want to slice it.
What do they do next? What's the timeline, Garrett? You know what I mean? Like,
Look,
okay,
yeah,
we can talk all we want about are they going to subpoena or not. And I've asked, I've asked Congressman Adam Schiff. You've asked Congressman a million of them, you know what I mean, members of this select committee, what they're going to do.
I think it's very much an active debate and discussion. I also think they still believe there's information they can get without doing the subpoena route here when it comes to members. We know they've talked to staff. They've talked to Mike Pence's staff. They've talked to members of the White House staff. Stephanie Grisham was just last week the former White House press secretary, top aide to Melania Trump. So there are still lower hanging fruits that may be available to them to get this same information without going down that road. But every day we get further into 2022, a midterm election year, is a day closer to them having to make that decision, knowing when they back time it, they're going to be dealing with almost certainly court challenges.
Garrett Haake, live for us on the Hill. Garrett, thank you for being on NBC News Now tonight. I appreciate it. So a new year means a new tax season. Did your blood pressure already go up at the words tax season? Well, get ready, because the IRS is now telling reporters just today, just this afternoon, that your tax refund might be delayed. They are in a tough position, right? Kind of a bad spot. The IRS commissioner saying in many areas we are unable to deliver the amount of service and enforcement that our taxpayers and tax system deserves and needs. This is frustrating for taxpayers, for IRS employees, and for me. I mean, listen, this is a government agency acknowledging they are not going to get the ball over the finish line in the way they need to. Josh Letterman is with us now. Never good, Josh, when you hear phrases like enormous challenges and frustrating coming from the IRS, right? This is just coming into us, I know, in the last hour or so. But can you bring us up to speed on what the deal is?
Well, from what we know, Hallie, it sounds like COVID-19 and staff shortages are really combining to create a perfect storm for the IRS and clog up their system. So in a typical year, the IRS starts tax season with about 1 million backlogged, unprocessed returns from the year before. This year, they're starting with about 6 times that many, about 6 million of them. So that's going to take a while to get through. They also have all of these new complicated tax provisions as a result of COVID. There's those stimulus payments, the expanded child tax credit, unemployment issues. So that's making it harder for them to process these tax returns. And then beyond that, there's Omicron-related staff shortages like we're seeing in every industry, as well as budget cuts to the IRS that have been pushed through by Republicans in recent years that mean they have fewer people on hand to actually deal with the applications and the tax returns we're all going to be sending in. In fact, the IRS now has fewer auditors on hand, Hallie, according to the Treasury Department, than they have had since the end of World War II.
That is, let me just let that statistic soak in, Josh, because I also think that's extraordinary. That is decades, right? That is a historic, dating back to the end of World War II, deficit here in auditors. Here's the thing, Josh. I think that, most regular folks would look at this. I look at this and I go, okay, so if the IRS is going to be late giving me my money that they owe me, why should I get my taxes into them on time? Like, why should I feel pressed on the April 15th or April 18th deadline this year? Any indication they're going to give an extension? I know that was something that we saw at the height of the pandemic.
No indication. It's a good question. As of right now, they are sticking to it's April 18th this year because of a holiday on the 15th. They're not anticipating at this point delaying that. Now, you can, of course, always apply for an extension, which millions of Americans do. There's also 2 things that you can try to do to make this process go smoother, according to the IRS. 1, make sure to file your taxes electronically. About 1 in 10 Americans still files using the old paper method. That makes it tougher for them. The other thing to do is make sure that you request your refund via direct deposit as opposed to a paper check.
That's smart.
You'll be more likely to get it on time that way.
Josh, your day job is covering the White House. I know you're covering Treasury for us tonight. Do you think, I got to think this is going to hit the level of the White House at some point, that they're going to face some questions about why the IRS is in such a position where the commissioner has to come out and say, I am frustrated with this.
Absolutely. And I think it's also going to be an opportunity for the White House to call attention to the need for more staffing at the IRS, particularly as the Biden administration, in its Build Back Better discussions, they've been looking at trying to raise more revenue from the IRS actually collecting taxes that people owe but have not actually paid. So this is really a situation where it could affect not only all of these Americans waiting for their tax returns, but also the government, because it's at the end of the day, that tax revenue that the government relies on to do all of the things the federal government's responsible for.
Josh Letterman, live for us there outside the White House. Josh, thank you. There are some big questions tonight about safety after 17 people died, 8 of them kids, in an apartment fire in the Bronx. Investigators are now focusing in on a space heater and what may have been a faulty door that should have closed automatically but didn't. New York City law requires apartment doors to do that, to shut automatically. The fire started Sunday morning. Officials think probably from a portable space heater on the second floor of this building, which is 19 stories. Firefighters say smoke was in every floor because when the people inside ran out of the apartment that had the fire, the door to it was left open, spreading smoke that may have kept other people from escaping. Some 200 firefighters responded to this thing, some of them running into the building even after their tanks ran out of oxygen. True heroism. For people who did make it out, as you might imagine, their emotion was palpable.
The smoke was so terrible. Coming out of the door, I called 911 3 times. They told us to put towels. I couldn't get to the door to put the towels.
I just heard people screaming, help, help, help.
It's the worst fire New York City has seen in more than 30 years. President Biden reached out to offer his condolences to the city's mayor, Eric Adams, who today reminded people, please close doors during a fire. Coming up here on the show, tennis star Novak Djokovic winning in an Australian court, but is that enough to get him back on the court for the Australian Open? The government says not so fast. We're going to talk about his chances for the controversial star when we come back. We got to talk about the latest in the Djokovic drama, right? Because Novak Djokovic, tennis star, huge tennis star, may be competing at the Australian Open this time next week. Or Novak Djokovic may not be competing at the Australian Open this time next week, right? Here's the deal. A federal judge today ordered his release from an immigration detention center in Australia, and they said his visa has to be reinstated. Remember the backstory here, right? Australian border forces had taken his visa away because he wasn't vaccinated and not providing the proper evidence for his exemption from getting the vaccine. So Djokovic, who's now free, is responding today, tweeting he's pleased and grateful that the judge overturned his visa cancellation, adding he, quote, wants to stay and try to compete in the Australian Open. But whether that'll happen is still TBD because there's one more step to go here. The Australian immigration minister could still cancel his visa. If that happens, he's going to be banned not just from tournaments, he could be banned from Australia altogether for 3 years. Former tennis star, coach, and ESPN analyst Brad Gilbert joins us now. Brad, I'm so glad to have you on. Thank you. Can you talk about the next step here, right? Because the Australian immigration minister kind of has the final word, and we're going to know soon whether it's thumbs up or thumbs down.
Good afternoon, Hallie. I happened to be watching the Raider game last night on NBC,
Okay.
so I was multitasking, and I was watching on my tablet, and before the hearing, I was thinking Joker was in trouble. Australia has always had very tough, visa laws coming in. And when Judge Kelly said early on, I'm a bit annoyed at that question. What more could this man have done? They took his cell phone. They didn't let him call or speak to anybody. So he got good news right away. And the whole thing comes down to this medical exemption, which he got at the last moment from the tournament and the city of Melbourne, which we have a lot of the same thing in the States right now. City, state, and federal, different laws about the virus. So he would have never gotten on the plane had he have not gotten this special exemption. But now, after getting that, he practiced last night. He wouldn't have hit a ball for 6 days. He couldn't leave his room. He's on this special diet. He wasn't getting that in this little hotel room. So he's got all of the tennis obstacles to be able to overcome. And also in late November, the tennis establishment was told that a special exemption wouldn't be allowed to say that you had COVID in the last 6 months. You needed something more like, it could have given me an irregular heartbeat. It could have caused something with asthma, something that more pertinent to a medical condition. And then after, he supposedly had COVID, that he got the news on December 16th, he's all over Belgrade the 17th and 18th. So that's a little bit dubious.
This is so interesting, Brad. So listen, we've heard from Rafael Nadal, who said this whole controversy is like a circus, right? Talk to me, because I know I shouldn't say, I assume that you're still in touch, with your tennis pals here. What's kind of the word, right? What's the sense or the vibe with Djokovic here? And what does it mean for him, whether he does or does not, for his career, right? What does it mean for his career, whether he plays in this Open?
Well, speak of playing, and the football game last night in Vegas, he rolled the dice on not getting vaccinated to get this medical exemption. Moving forward, Hallie, I think it will be extremely difficult to travel. People say because you have money. I'm not even sure whether or not you have money or not. Your normal travel plans to do things without being vaccinated will be extremely difficult. He's supposed to come to the States in March to play Indian Wells in Miami. Good luck getting into the States now being unvaccinated, or Canada, or a lot of different places. So I do think the simple equation is get vaccinated. But we're seeing this with Kyrie Irving. He can't play home games. He can play some road games now. So I do believe moving forward, if Joker continues on his stand not to get vaccinated, I think he will have more problems than he's having here in Australia.
Brad Gilbert, you have 45 more minutes? I already said to Andrew Mitchell, for you, let's do it. I can't, but listen, next time, we'd love to have you back, because that is just fascinating, and the whole thing is just, like we said, it's drama in the tennis world, Brad. Thank you.
And then you got a little bit of the vaccinated
all
versus the unvaccinated.
It's all of it.
Politics, everything.
Brad Gilbert, thank you. I really appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, a whole lot more, although we have to say goodbye to Brad, including a new report that says greenhouse gas emissions are way up, and that could slow down the fight against climate change. So what's it going to take to get back on track? Our Ann Thompson is here after the break. Out in L.A., police officers making an incredible rescue with literally seconds to spare. We've got the surreal body cam video from when officers pulled a pilot from a plane wreck before a train hit it. If that description wasn't enough, stick around for the video in just a second. But I want to get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, a court in Myanmar sentenced ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi to 4 more years in prison. She's been found guilty of multiple charges, including possession of unlicensed walkie-talkies. It's one of about a dozen cases brought against her. If found guilty on all of the charges, she could be sentenced to more than 100 years in prison. Number 2, Robert Durst has died in a hospital at the age of 78. It's months after he was sentenced to life for murdering his friend Susan Berman. Durst was also indicted for the death of his wife, who vanished in 1982. Number 3, Alec Baldwin says he's been complying with the investigation into the deadly shooting of a cinematographer on the set of his movie Rust. Last month, Baldwin refused to turn over his phone to police in New Mexico. He says that's only because those officials did not go through the proper channels. Number 4, Bob Saget, America's TV dad, the dad in Full House. He was found dead Sunday in a hotel room in Florida. So many people are reeling from this one. Officials say they haven't found any signs foul play or drugs played a part in his death. Saget was 65. Number 5, check out history made at last night's private Golden Globes ceremony. Michaela J. MJ Rodriguez took home the award for Best Actress in a TV Drama for her role on the FX show Pose. It's the first time ever that a trans actor has won a Golden Globe. A couple new reports out on climate change we want to talk about. With the news, I hate to say it, it's not great. For one, last year was the 5th hottest year in history, according to a new report from the EU. And that other report finds U.S. greenhouse gas emissions jumped more than 6% last year, up from 2020 levels. Don't forget, President Biden wants to cut emissions in half by 2030. Now, listen, part of that jump is because not as much of the economy was locked down last year like it was at the start of the pandemic, right? That's some context. So let's unpack more of it with Ann Thompson here to help us out. Ann, listen, you cover this. This is your beat day to day. We've seen the effects of human-caused climate change, right? And some experts say that big summit in Scotland recently just didn't do enough to address how big of a deal this actually is. So what do we do? What are countries supposed to do when these numbers are just so bad? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. You're absolutely right, Hallie. I mean, Glasgow did not come close to getting the kinds of pledges that are needed to keep the world from feeling the worst effects of climate change. What's needed is leadership. I mean, in Glasgow, you basically saw the world's biggest emitters play a game of chicken because the fear of getting off fossil fuels, the fear of what that could do to your economy outweighs the good that it could do for the entire entire planet. And that fear of declining economic growth, in fact, after coming out of the pandemic, where you saw growth drop dramatically and you saw greenhouse gas emissions drop dramatically as well, is really the pressure that's here. And while they did make some efforts to say, yes, further down the road, they kind of kicked the can down the road, we will do something. It's almost too late. We have to do something now. At least that's what the scientists tell us.
The coal factor here is a big deal, too, because we talked about the context of like lockdown versus economy started reopening, et cetera, at least a little bit as the pandemic started to get somewhat better. Talk about that as a part of the context here.
Yeah, coal, we saw an increase in coal use in 2021 in the United States, and that's the first time that has happened since 2014. What's behind that? It's simply economics. What happened was the price of natural gas went up, and when that happened, energy producers, electricity producers turned to coal because it was, for once, cheaper than natural gas, and that's why you saw coal use tick up. That's not expected. That's not a trend that is expected to continue, in large part because the price of solar, wind, geothermal, that's all coming down, and that's expected to put additional price pressure on coal and force electricity producers to opt for cleaner, cheaper ways to produce energy.
Any sense that that goal of, reducing emissions by 50% by the end of the decade may need to get revised, right? Managed downward, perhaps, at this point? You can't. I mean, if you revise it and you do less, that's essentially admitting defeat. So, and that's probably the most disturbing thing that came out of the Rhodium Group's report today, estimating our greenhouse gas emissions in 2021. And that is, right now, we are on track to only reduce greenhouse gas emissions by some 17%. That's far from the 52 to 52% that the Biden administration wants to see by the end of the decade. What will help us get there? Well, the Biden administration says that's where the Build Back Better bill comes in, because it would create tax incentives for businesses and consumers to invest in clean technologies and really speed up that adoption of clean technologies, things like electric cars, that will help get us to that goal. Ann Thompson, great to have you on. Thank you very much for that breakdown. Appreciate it. So check it out. It's an incredible video. Like you sometimes hear that a lot from news people, right? Like, dramatic video, you got to watch this video. You have got to watch this video. LA police officers pulling a man from a plane that crashed on train tracks. Then if that wasn't enough, the train comes barreling through literally seconds after the guy is pulled out. Watch.
Go, 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 go!
Ugh. It makes your heart drop in your chest a little bit. The pilot is alive after those officers literally put their lives on the line. Look, you see this, right? That's the plane. That's the train smashing it to bits. They are like, 10 feet away? It's about a half a block from the LAPD. Several officers then blocked the road from traffic, tried to warn the oncoming train. Obviously, it was too late. I want to get to Gotti Schwartz in LA, who's covering this. Gotti, I cannot get over this video, right? I want to play it again from a different angle because it's just, again, we say this a lot. It's dramatic video. Like, this really is. Here it is from the other angle. Just so scary, and it's so incredible when you think about the heroism of these officers. What are we hearing from them?
And it's 4 seconds. It's 4 critical seconds. Yeah, I just got back from chatting with those officers at the station.
Oh.
Some of them described having so much of a tunnel vision that they didn't even know a train was coming. Others saying that they heard that train horn, they saw the lights, they knew they only had seconds to get that pilot to safety. And Hallie, I got to tell you, showing up to interview them, what makes it all even crazier is when you pull up to the station, you realize that the police station is just down the street. We're talking a few hundred yards away from where all of this happened. So let's just run through the odds really quick. What are the chances of a plane crashing in general? That's pretty low. And then a plane crashing and stopping exactly on a 5-foot wide railroad track, then happening right before a train comes, then on top of all of that happening right in front of a police station. When you stop and think about it, the chances are absolutely mind-boggling. And of course, it's Los Angeles. You've got bystanders with cell phones cameras at the ready and that body cam footage to capture it from all the different angles, fortunately, because if somebody was telling me this, I would not believe it without seeing it for myself.
I have, when you describe it like that, Gotti, I mean, I have kind of chills, right? Thinking about this pilot, this man whose life was saved, right, by the luckiest of circumstances here. Were there people on the train coming through? It was a commuter train, right?
It was a commuter train. We understand that no one was injured on the train.
Okay.
We know that the pilot is now recovering, but the officer who you see pulling him out, he summed it up perfectly. He said earlier to me that this pilot was lucky to be alive after almost dying twice within 10 minutes, and he needed to buy a lottery ticket right across the street. And as we were chatting, I think it dawned on him that he also came within 4 seconds of dying himself with all the other officers that you see pulling that pilot to safety. So he promised us that he would also be buying a lottery ticket across the street as well.
I would not be surprised if, like, you know, in a week from now, you're back on with me from LA talking about, like, the hero officer Powerball winner. Do you know what I mean? I have to say, too, you know, Gotti, you know this better than anybody. This hasn't been an area where there's been more than one plane crash over the years. Some people in the community are sort of bitter about this, right? They're not thrilled because of the broader issue. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so even the officers there, they said that it wasn't that surprising that there was a plane crash because they've seen small planes crash in that area before. Over the last few years, there have been at least 2 fatal crashes, and some of them landing in neighborhoods, which is the biggest concern from neighbors. Some neighbors actually stopped us when we were there, and they said that they wanted to see this airport shut down. They see it more of as danger than a benefit to the immediate area because most of those who own planes and fly out of that airport aren't the people from the community, aren't the people from that immediate vicinity in Pacoima. So 2020, one plane crashed into a neighborhood, taking out a row of cars. 2018, there was another fatal crash right at the edge of that airport. So again, their biggest fear is that the next time one of those planes is going to come down in somebody's yard, possibly on somebody's house, which is something that we've seen out here in Southern California.
And maybe next time, you know, the folks involved won't be so lucky. That's a scary thought there. Gotti Schwartz live for us there in LA. Gotti, we'll look for more of your reporting tonight and that interview on Nightly. Appreciate it, friend. Coming up, Apple's AirTags are supposed to track your stuff, right? But there are some reports they're being used to track people. Coming up, Vicky Nguyen gives us the backstory on what it's like when someone watches your every move after her investigation. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Our Northeast Bureau, reporting New York City is getting more than 800,000 new voters soon. Starting as early as next year, non-citizens and so-called dreamers will get to vote in local elections. Mayor Eric Adams allowed the voting legislation to become law yesterday. The Republican National Committee is fighting this thing. It's suing the mayor, the city council, and the Board of Elections. Out of our Southeast Bureau, remember when there were all these headlines about an auto repair shop in Georgia that paid a former employee's last paycheck in pennies? The feds saw the headlines too, and now they're suing the shop. They say the business and its owner discriminated against the worker after he called the Department of Labor to report not getting his last check. Man. And from our Midwest Bureau, talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Look at this. Crews had to rescue 27 people who got stuck on a floating chunk of ice. That's right. It broke off from the shore in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Most of the people there had been fishing when it happened. They were stranded for like an hour and a half. The chunk of ice floated 3/4 of a mile from the shore. No one was hurt, thank goodness. But boy, can I be honest? That is the stuff that nightmares are made of. It's time to get to the backstory now. Our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our biggest picture. You're probably familiar with some of the stuff that Apple sells, right? Phones and iPads and computers. But what about those little Apple AirTags, right? You can stick them on your keys or your wallets. Samsung has these kinds of things too. But now there's some concerns about safety and privacy if, for example, these are used by the wrong people. Apple's AirTags made headlines just recently when Sports Illustrated model Brooks Nader shared on social media somebody slipped an AirTag into her coat pocket while she was out in New York City. It took like 5 hours until she got a notification on her iPhone that she was getting tracked. Apple hasn't said how many times local law enforcement has gotten in touch with the company about this kind of thing, cases of unwanted tracking. But we do know there have been a few incidents police reported in Colorado, Georgia, Michigan, Texas. Apple says they're trying to do something about this, though. They've made some software updates in the last few months to deter this kind of thing. Police say if you think you're being tracked, you should alert law enforcement, obviously. Don't go home. Go somewhere else. And then get in touch. Apple says it'll work with police to help track down the owner of the AirTag. They've got serial numbers on each device they can use to investigate, which means they're probably going to catch the person who did this. Our Vicky Nguyen decided to see how easy it would be to get tracked herself by hitting the streets of New York with an AirTag in her purse. Well, her investigative producer, there he is, Joe Enoch, watched her every move down to the exact spot where she sat down for lunch. Vicky Nguyen is joining me now to talk more about what this story was like. Vicky, it's so good to have you on. Tell me how this story came together, because I think it's super interesting for anybody who has an AirTag or maybe wants one.
Oh, definitely, Hallie. Great to be with you. I love this segment of your show. I love the whole show, but this is a fun one because it's a story behind the story. And what happened was we just started seeing those social media videos, people saying, hey, I've been tracked by one of these AirTags. You know, that's sort of hard to verify sometimes when something shows up on TikTok or Instagram. But it was when the local police departments all over the country started issuing warnings here and there saying that these AirTags could be used to follow your car, to follow you. That's when we thought, you know what, we need to investigate this because new technology often spurs new uses that people don't always think about.
One of the things here that I think is interesting, we said this in the introduction, kind of setting up your story, that Apple says, yeah, you will you should get a notification if you're getting tracked or something. When you did this experiment, it took something like 4 hours, right, for you to get that notification that Joe was able to watch you after Joe had put that AirTag in your purse. What are you supposed to do? Like, how did it feel for you to know that, listen, you were doing the story, so you had some awareness of it, but to know that somebody could track where you were going to lunch as you were going about your day?
Oh, it was crazy. So here's what happened. Joe decided he was going to pick up a few of these AirTags, and then he went around the city with his fiancée first, just to get a sense of how these things work. So there's Joe, there's Elizabeth. It's like a whole family affair with this consumer investigative team. We are all about showing you how things work, not just telling you, right? So demonstration, that is really our middle name. Joe figured out, okay, when do we think we're going to get these alerts? When he was doing this with Elizabeth, it happened in about an hour. You got an alert that said, hey, someone's following you with an AirTag nearby, right? So that's what I expected when I went out. When we put it in my purse, I thought, okay, an hour into this thing, he's going to figure out, or I'm going to figure out that there's an AirTag with me, and we're going to write to that in the story and incorporate it. It turns out I was all over the city. He could see my every move. He could see the exact store I went into, a Sephora. He could see me when I was on the subway. Because anywhere you can get a cell phone signal, this little guy can ping a location. So when I got home 4 hours later and I still hadn't got the alert, I was thinking, when is this thing going to happen? And then I realized, wow, in 4 hours, think about how much information someone can gather about you, your daily routine, where you drop off your kids for school, and ultimately where you live. So that was definitely a creepy feeling.
What's so interesting, just full disclosure, Vicky, like I have an Apple AirTag, right, on my bike. I ride my bike. I'm a bike commuter, and like I have one just in case. There's a lot of bike theft in D.C. You know what I mean? There are reasons for good for Apple AirTags. There are also obviously these kinds of concerns, and you reached out to Apple. They gave you a statement that said they're committed to privacy and that AirTags are designed to proactively discourage unwanted tracking. What I find is so interesting, and I've experienced this, I've had to reach out to, for example, Facebook or other kind of big tech companies for statement. How much did they want to play ball with you on this story? And how did you go about that process? I think, for people who don't do this on a daily basis, it's always interesting to think about, trying to get a company to engage with you on a story that may not be super flattering to them.
Right, and this did not come as a surprise to Apple, but we approach it anyway, the same way we would with anyone else. Transparency is the best policy. We were straight up with Apple. We said, here's what we found when we took this device out. What say you? What advice do you give? How are you protecting users' safety and privacy? And to their credit, they gave us a response. And really, I think that that's the only way you can approach it. And I think companies are becoming a lot more media savvy. They understand that a no comment is not an acceptable response, especially to the millions of people who use their products. Something else we were getting questions about is, well, what about the Samsung trackers? What about Tile?
Right.
They use technology like this. But here's the thing. Apple's AirTag, it's the newest thing on the market, and it's very accurate. It's great for your bike because it pings millions of other Apple devices, which really helps to pinpoint a location. So what makes it good is also what makes it tempting to the bad guys. And so that's part of why we felt this was newsworthy and we really wanted to investigate and show users how it works and also how to protect yourself.
Vicki, it is amazing to have you on. I love having you on for the backstory. Please come back. Let's do it again. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Coming up.
Anytime, Hallie.
Thank you. Coming up here on the show, Alabama and Georgia facing off tonight for the College Football National Championship. But even before kickoff, some players have already won big. We're going to explain how with Sam Brock in a sec. Tonight, college football will crown a champion, and the guy who leads his team to a title could cash in big. That's because tonight's big-time rematch between Alabama and Georgia is the first national title game in the name, image, and likeness era. What does that mean? It means since last summer, college athletes have had the opportunity to get paid by sponsors for the first time. And some of these players already have monster deals. Look at tonight's starting quarterback for the Crimson Tide, Bryce Young. Last summer, his head coach, Nick Saban, told reporters Young had deals worth nearly $1 million before he even took a snap. And take a look at what he's got going. Look at that list. This is according to the Sports Business Journal. He's a sophomore in college, and he has 14 of these huge deals with Netflix, with Subway, with Cash App. Hey, man, do it. Sam Brock is watching the game from South Florida tonight. Sam, what is so interesting here? In Alabama and Georgia, you know, fans of college football, they sleep it, they breathe it, they eat it. These players are like the biggest sports stars in their state. Whoever stands out tonight, it feels safe to say, could get paid big time.
Hallie, just the profile of this game means there are definitely going to be paydays from tonight. That said, I'm going to blow your mind right now because I did a little bit of research here and looked at which sports, I know, don't you want that to happen? I looked at which sports are getting all the NIL money so far. Okay. Of all the college sports, let's say a couple dozen of them with anything meaningful, 48%, almost 50% of it is college football. After that comes women's basketball, about a quarter, then men's basketball, which is 17%, and the rest of the sports are basically fighting for scraps. So
okay, wait, that doesn't, can I just be honest?
This is the premier sport.
That is about what I would have thought. Here's what surprises me, that men's basketball isn't higher, like the college men's basketball isn't higher. But college football, of course, it's a monster.
I was surprised by that as well. 100%. I was surprised that women's basketball is basically double or close to it what men's basketball is. We'll get to that in a second, but let me finish this thought on Bryce Young. You talked about him a second ago. He's a Heisman winner. He's likely going to be the #1 overall pick in the NFL draft in a couple of years. He's an elite NFL prospect and talent. If you look at him, Kayvon Thibodeau from Oregon or Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan, these guys are cashing in on six-figure deals. They are the exception, not the rule. Most of the players in college football or college athletics in general are making on average, Hallie, about $1,200. That's the stat from Open Doors with contracts. But the big names at the very top of the top are making big bucks.
Okay, so go back to your other thought here, because not everybody is Bryce Young, obviously, right? There are these, as you talk about, $1,200 on average deals. You've got female athletes, which I love to hear, right? Women basketball players, for example, not always seen as the most high-profile thing. Do people generally feel like this NIL thing is working, like it's successful?
Absolutely. It has worked right away. And I had a conversation with Lexi Sun, who is a star volleyball player from Nebraska, a couple of months ago, right when this all came to fruition. She is signing deals left and right. She's got her own line of jewelry at an Omaha jeweler. She has her own line of clothing, all kinds of sponsorships. Lexi Sun also, Hallie, and here's the important point, has 70 or 80,000 followers on Instagram. She has more followers than the Nebraska quarterback. So when it comes to self-marketing in this day and age of NIL, if you are savvy on social media and you have a lot of followers and you're really good at presenting yourself, the Cavender twins, which are female basketball players from Fresno State, are an amazing example of this. They have 4 million followers on TikTok and Instagram and a couple of other platforms. They have so many followers, they can leverage that for deals. And we're seeing that increasingly right now, that it doesn't matter whether or not you're going to have a successful professional career. If you can present yourself in a really charismatic way, online, it makes a massive difference in cashing in on these deals.
It is fascinating. I love the stats. That was great reporting. Before I let you go, talk about tonight. Are you Roll Tide or you Go Dogs?
Well, personally, who would I bet on, right? Roll Tide, I think. How do you not roll Tide when Nick Saban has won 6 championships? Okay. Kirby Smart has, unfortunately, 0 championships. They have not won since 1980. And, oh, yeah, it's the University of Alabama. But wouldn't it be nice if we saw an underdog win? All right. Maybe once in a while? I don't know. We'll have to stay and see.
Not like you're going to be watching tonight. Sam Brock, thank you so much for being with us, friend. I appreciate you being with us. Thank you, thank you. And thanks to all of you for watching. That's it. We're back here tomorrow. Same time, same place. We'll see you Tuesday. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.